Liel Leibovitz, thank you for being with me.
What a pleasure, my friend.
Such a great pleasure. Okay, so we're gonna talk about your book, How the Talmud Can Change Your Life.
Thank you for holding it up.
Surprisingly modern advice from a very old book. Before we do that, who are you?
I am a Jew. I'm an itinerant Jew. I am a ninth generation Israeli-born, currently American Jewish writer, thinker, and itinerant drinker who came to the Talmud, as we all do, later in life, looking for not answers, but questions. I'm an editor-at-large for Tablet Magazine, co-host of a small podcast you may be familiar with, which you started, Unorthodox. Your jacket right behind you here is the official alumni of Unorthodox podcast, and also the Daf Yomi podcast. More about that in the second, Take One, which gives you about 8 minutes of Talmud daily.
It's grown. It used to be about 5 minutes.
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of it to go around.
It's fattened, yeah. So within the hour or half hour, however long, everyone who listens to this will understand exactly what the Talmud is, everything about it.
You'll be Talmudic scholars.
We'll be Talmudic scholars. But I want to back into that by getting your story first. When I met you, which is 12 years ago now, 10, 11, 12, it's like a life. It's,
I was but a young lad.
3 Bibi Netanyahu governments ago. Mm-hmm. You were, the king of the bacon cheeseburger, the prince of scallops and other shellfish. You were,
I believe, the Prince of Scallops is actually a Barbara Streisand movie.
Yeah, Prince of. I'm not on Team Barbara, and I remember that our friend Stephanie is on Team Barbara. I don't remember where you come down.
Oh, I'm the extreme end of the anti-Barbara movement.
Hence, you had to read it for your sins. So when I met you, that doesn't mean you weren't interested in Talmud, but you were not interested in Jewish observance in the way you are now.
Correct.
Could we get the story of how you got to be someone who reads a page of Talmud every day? Again, and people who don't know what that even means will learn what it means in about 7 minutes. But could we get, starting maybe at age 3 or 4, or however back you want to go, to being the guy who's reading a page of Talmud a day? What's the journey there?
Though I fear that, like all good conversion stories, there's no, aha moment of, epiphany, come to Moses type of moment. I was born in a, somewhat secular family in Israel, but the descendant of a great, great, important rabbi. And I, while a few cheeseburgers removed from the faith of my fathers, always had this kind of understanding that practice didn't really matter. The thing that mattered is that you loved God, you loved the Jewish people, you wanted to be a good person, and if you checked all those 3 boxes, does God really care if I enjoy, help myself to some oysters and, a few other treif delights? And I went through life happily for, a good long while, feeling quite strongly that way. And then the clouds began to darken in a way. First of all, I found that the main engine of survival to which I've tethered my rickety wagon, the academic pursuit and the life of scholarship in Ivy League universities, began to feel shaky to me for reasons that we don't have to go to right now, but that I think are obvious to anyone who's paying attention to what's happening in college campuses these last couple of years.
Your life plan had been to be a professor.
My life plan had been, and it, to my chagrin, it was working out just fine. I did get my PhD. I did teach at a large university. I felt like I was making it, and something about that life felt empty. Also, the children arrived, and I found that when
you mean your children?
Well, yes.
They're always children arriving.
At least I think they're
your
mine.
Son and daughter. Okay.
They keep calling me dad and demanding to be fed. So let's hope that they indeed are. They came. You have a few on me. But as soon as you have children, this is a completely perfectly banal thing to say, but you sort of begin questioning the modes of transmission of ideas and permutations that seem really obvious to you, because as I was trying to say, well, how do I convey to them why God is actually important to me? How do I convey to them why Jewish tradition is important to me if they're not practicing any of it, if they're not living through any of it, which kind of already put me in the headspace of, okay, there's more to it. I started observing by happenstance. Truly, I was walking around Jerusalem one day. There was a nice man by the Kotel, the Western Wall, who said, "Would you like to put in tefillin?" And instinctively, I said, "Sure."
Tefillin being the little boxes containing scraps of Jewish prayer.
The English word is so awful.
Phylacteries.
No one's phylacteries.
No one's ever used it.
No, it's disgusting.
It's a disgusting word.
My rheumatologist described some phylacteries to rid me of my condition.
So we'll use the Hebrew word tefillin. They're little boxes that contain scraps of Hebrew prayer. You bind them to your arm and your forehead when you pray
with leather straps
in the morning. With leather straps,
which looks a little bit kinky.
Yeah, I once wrote that it looks like a snake slithering up your arm, holding on a little box with its teeth.
It looks exactly like this.
Yeah.
So
this guy at the Western Wall said, "Do you want to put these on?"
I said, "Sure, I'll put them on." So I put them on, and something clicks, and I say, "I'm gonna do this. This feels good." There's a logic in Judaism that you always read and you always affirm, but you don't really understand until you practice. It's this moment in which the Israelites are standing at the foothills of the mount, and the Torah comes down, and their response is shocking. It's Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will hear, which if you think about it, is a complete inversion of any logical permission. It's like, what do you want me to do? Like, please tell me first, and then I will do. It turns out that with actual religious practice, you need to first commit and then understand the logic, which is so beautiful because truly you don't get what this does until you do it. A few years later, I was sitting at our favorite Italian restaurant with my lovely wife, and she said, "Okay, so we'll get the prosciutto to start," and then I said, "No, I'm kosher. I keep kosher now." And she says, "Since when?" And I said, "Well, 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. I don't know. I just feel I need to do it." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "I can't answer this question. Look, it's been 12 years. I still can't answer the question."
So you didn't know it was coming that night?
No.
It escaped.
It just happened.
As Homer said, it escaped the barriers of your teeth.
That's right. It just happened. As Homer Simpson said. It absolutely did that.
I want to linger on that for just 1 second. Was that hard for your wife?
Extremely so. It led to a very, I don't want to say rift, but a rocky, 3 or 4 years in the marriage in which she felt insecure. Felt, first of all, like I was denying her access to some dark recesses of my emotional life. It was very hard for her to accept that I didn't know much more about it than I was letting on, because it was just something that was happening to me. And then even more acutely, her biggest fear, I would say, she knows me, slightly better than you know me, but you know me well enough to know that this is not an unfounded concern. She says, "Okay, so what guarantee do I have that 3 days from now you're not coming with a very long beard and a black hat and saying, 'My name is Shmuel now, and by the way, we have to pull the kids out of school and put them in a yeshiva because we're moving to the most, very Orthodox neighborhood imaginable.'" She was, I think, worried it would be a slippery slope and that life would not be what she had signed up for. So it took a few years to work.
What did you say to her? Did you make a promise that you wouldn't be yanking the kids out of yeshiva?
I made a promise.
Or into yeshiva?
I made a promise that I believe in a religion that holds shlom bayit, or peace in the home, almost above anything else. And I said, the point of this journey isn't to set things on fire. It's to bring more light into the home, and we will do it in a way that would work for everyone, which indeed has been the case, which is why, one of my greatest sources of pride and joy is that completely independently of me, she eventually went through a very similar process, as did the kids, to whom we never said, "Oh, you must now keep kosher." It was always a choice that we gave them. It was a logic that was strongly explained to them, but we wanted them to come to it if they felt this is what they wanted, which now is the case to our great joy. But the thing that you realize,
we vegetarians are still waiting for you to join us. The boat is floating down the river.
My friend, morally, I'm completely with you. Gustatorially, I am very, very, very far away.
You only have so many gods you can worship.
The promise of a sizzling steak is just too much for me to refuse. But once you start doing this thing, once you start saying, "Okay, well, I'm kosher now," and you walk into your favorite restaurant, and here it is, the dish you always got, that perfect 6 oysters with a mignonette that goes so nicely with your nightly martini, and you cannot. And you feel the choices that you have made. And when you feel complete peace, and you say like, this is delicious. I understand why I loved this. I don't crave it because I have a different sort of relationship. I have a different sort of elevation. I have a different sort of mindset. It truly is transformational. And I've been feeling this more and more and more and more, which led me to be ready to pursue what I truly believe is the greatest self-help book ever written, the Talmud, to which I came at a point in life in which I was considerably more broken than I am now, and needed, to quote my Rebbe, Leonard Cohen, a manual for living with defeat, and found it in the one and only, the instruction book for life, that is the Talmud.
Was that Leonard Cohen? You mentioned it in your book that Leonard Cohen came up with that line. I'm forgetting. Was that his description of the Talmud?
No, that was his description of his work.
Okay. Got it. So before we go any further, I want, in 1 minute or less, for you to tell people what the Talmud is.
I will do this in 1 minute or less, and then, like every good superhero, I'll provide a more lively origin story. Sure. So the Talmud is a 2,711-page book presented in 63 tractates, divided into 6 general orders. Each order is about a different area of human life. It is divided, roughly speaking, into 2 parts. One is the Mishnah, or the compendium of oral laws that we believe were given by God to Moses on Sinai and then passed from generation to generation until collected in writing around the year, say, 250, 200 CE. And then there's the second part, the Gemara, which is commentary on the oral law, collected for another 350 years by rabbis who sat and studied these laws and argued about them, and all this was put in a book. This is a perfectly boring argument or summation of a incredibly dramatic story, because here's the story, the real story of the Talmud. It's the year 70, and the Romans had just burned the temple, and the sacred place that was the heart of Judaism for hundreds of years is now completely gone. So the question is, what happens now? It's an extinction event. There is no cultural Judaism back then. There's no, I love bagels and Seinfeld.
Right.
So I'm a Jew, I guess.
There's no playing squash at the JCC, coming home Sunday mornings to bagels.
There is taking your goat to the temple and sacrificing it.
And now you have no temple.
And now you have no temple, right? So what do you do? So the rabbis knocking about Jerusalem around this time had 2 incredible insights. The first is that you could take this old-timey religion and put it in a book. All these ideas, all these practices, all these, things, rites and rituals that you performed, you could put them in a book, which is in of itself an astonishing notion for those of us who still enjoy reading. But they were smarter than that, because they knew that if they simply just captured the rules. Hey guys, we eat this. On some days we don't eat that. We
say the Shema at this hour.
Exactly. They knew what would happen. They knew that us humans suffer from a tendency to think that time equals progress equals wisdom, and so we would inevitably say, back in their day, this idea was relevant because, to light a fire, you had to rub sticks together. So that was a lot of work. I get it. But now, to turn on a light, it's just flicking a switch. It's no work at all. So I don't have to observe Shabbat. And then all the magic and the religion goes away. So rather than writing down rules, they did the most amazing and the most Jewish thing. And they wrote down arguments. They captured, reams and reams and reams of disagreements and disputations between rabbis from, spanning hundreds of years and dozens of generations, talking and arguing and thinking and disagreeing their way through these really, really, really big questions. The Talmud rarely offers answers, but it offers a very good way to thinking about every question that pertains to humanity.
So, Liel, your book is about your time reading the Talmud and the lessons you've drawn from it and what it has to say about us. But for people who don't know what an actual page of Talmud looks like, and you said there are 2,711 of them, would you tell us, this is a page of Talmud on the screen behind you. What's going on there?
First of all, observe the typographical beauty of this thing. It looks like nothing that you have seen. It's all these boxes all over the page. A good friend, the writer Jonathan Rosen, made a great argument in a great book that this right here, the Talmud page, is truly a precursor to the internet. It provides hyperlinks because, very, very generally speaking, here's what you're looking at. Right here, basically from here to here, this little 2 letters here, you're seeing the Mishnah, right? So this is the oral law.
2nd century.
The well, collected over hundreds and hundreds of years, but kind of let's say
Codified,
redacted
Yes.
in this around the 2nd century, right? So here you have basically the law, right? Here's a principle that the oral law projects. And from here to here, you have the Gemara. These, you will see, by the way, I don't know if those of our viewers who are fluent in both languages would see that this right here is in Hebrew. But from here to here, it's Aramaic. It's the lingua franca of a later era of sort of common international. It's the English of its day.
what Jesus spoke, apparently.
Jesus,
First and
Jesus-
2nd century Palestine.
Jesus rocked
Yeah.
Aramaic.
Right.
And this is the arguments and the sort of disputations on this, which in of itself is already kind of a weird way to think about it. And enter all sorts of commentaries. Here, for example, up top, you'll see this beautiful kind of like curly-cued script, is the Rashi, the great 11th century commentator, French rabbi, kind of helping you make sense of some of this stuff. Here, for example, you have a bunch of references because the rabbis are talking about biblical verses. Here are the verses that they're talking about so that you may then go and check against the source. Here are more and more and more and more commentaries from rabbis spanning history all the way from the time of antiquity until the Middle Ages. So when you're reading a page of Talmud or when you're studying a page of Talmud, you really are looking at this kind of sort of glut of sources. You're not just, okay, well, I read it, I get it. You're entering the argument. There's commentary on the commentary. There's commentary on the commentary on the commentary. And the point is that it begins with you. You will notice, by the way, and this is one of my favorite kind of little, tricks that Talmud does. This is the first page on the screen behind us. The first page of the first tractate of the Talmud. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, you see the letter Bet. It's the second letter of the alphabet, but this is the first page. Why not begin with Aleph? Why not begin with page number 1? Well, there's obviously a lot of answers to this, but the most beautiful one that I've heard is that page 1 is you. Your decision to open this book and learn is the prerequisite to there even being a second page. This is a work of deciphering. Jonathan Rosen again said that the Talmud is not so much a book as it is a drift net for catching God. I think that's very beautiful.
So this page of Talmud here, and this is where they're talking about what time you say the Shema, right? That's the argument.
So they begin.
Right. When the first question is the central prayer of Judaism, when is it okay to say it? When are you obligated to say it? It begins with page 2, as it were, and it incorporates sources, well, going back to Torah, going back to stuff that was codified in the thousands of years before the Common Era, all the way up to about the 11th century. The Rashi is the last script on it, right? So you're talking about thousands of years all on one page, and stuff is commenting on other stuff. It is very, not just internet, but almost video game, right? Like you can go into this room or go into this room.
It is, except for like a video game, but unlike the internet, it has a core script, a core source code, if you will,
Right.
that binds it together because it all goes back to Torah. The internet, is a snake eating its own head. It doesn't have,
Well, and it can also take you farther, and it's almost designed at this point to take you farther and farther from
the truth.
From truth, right? Like you start with a question about, when do I say the morning prayer, and you end up looking at, pornographic videos about donkeys. I mean, it's
so
right.
So I hear,
And it never works you back. It never brings you back. You
No.
just end up in hell, basically. You end up in the fires of Gehenna. Now, your most recent excursus into the Talmud, which I think generated this book, started with the Daf Yomi cycle.
Yes.
Explain to people what this is.
So to get people to engage with this visibly, intellectually, emotionally difficult, demanding book, rabbis came up pretty recently, right, in the 19th century, or I think 19th or early 20th
1920s,
century.
I think.
Right, early 20th century, with this idea that we could read a page of Talmud a day. Daf is a page, Yomi is a day. In a cycle that takes 7.5 years to complete, which is a really kind of magical way to do it because you know that at any given moment, you're studying the exact same questions as hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews around the world who are doing the exact same thing in their morning commutes, in their yeshivas, around their kitchen tables, in Melbourne, in Petah Tikva, anywhere they are. So it's a really fun kind of World Book Club, if you will.
Everyone starts on the same day. They go for 7.5 years.
Yes.
Then they have a big party. Around the world, there are parties.
And here in New York, at the large football stadium for the Giants and the Jets, MetLife Stadium, it fills the entire stadium. It's 100,000 something humans, more than attend a Taylor Swift concert even, join together, secular and religious men and women, to celebrate this amazing achievement.
And then the next day they start all over again.
And then the next day they start all over again.
And you hear stories about all the different ways that people come together to do this. Obviously, there are podcasts where you can listen in every day, read along with other listeners of the podcast and the host. You host such a podcast, take one. But there are clubs that meet on commuter trains. The Long Island Railroad, apparently there's a car
Yes,
where...
there is. I've been there.
Have you?
Oh, yeah.
How many people is... Tell me that scene.
It depends on the day. I mean, usually it's, about a dozen or so humans who come together on their daily commute to sort of learn together. It's beautiful.
Is this just men?
On that train, yes.
But
in general, there are so many permutations of Daf Yomi. There are amazing podcasts only for women, clubs only for women. There's whatever you're seeking,
Right.
You could find that flavor.
there's women's Daf Yomi, there's Jew of color Daf Yomi, there's queer Daf Yomi,
The
there's...
beautiful thing is that the Talmud truly contains multitude. There isn't a realm of human life that is not already, incorporated, encapsulated, discussed, analyzed at great length in the Talmud. Nothing human is foreign to it, which is wonderful.
I want to take 2 chapters of your book and have you teach a little Talmud to us. I want to start with the first one, where you begin by talking about Weight Watchers. And then I want to go to the friendship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, which I think is your last chapter or your penultimate chapter. You start the book not where I expect, in 2nd century Palestine, not in 18th century Lviv, you start it in America, early 20th century, 1930s or 40s. I forget when Jean Nidetch was born.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden we're learning the story of how she invented Weight Watchers. As the kids say, WTF, what the heck is going on here? Tell us the story.
So when I wanted to write this book, the great hurdle facing me is, how do you take something that is so intricate, that is so complicated, that is so arcane, and convince people that this is truly the greatest self-help book ever written, and that if you bother with it, it will have profound things to tell you about life. And so the sort of stratagem there was to take contemporary stories, or contemporary-ish stories, and make things relevant to our life today by showing the clear connections between these stories and the rabbinic principles, and also the lives of the rabbis. And so I begin with the story of Jean Nidetch. She's an amazing woman, born in Brooklyn, raised in New York, always struggled with her weight. And
a struggle you've been candid about.
A struggle I'm very candid about. I feel it, innately. And the thing that she was kind of butting up against was this notion that any diet plan that she tried, any approach that she took, all of them, of course, failures, basically required some kind of separation between body and mind. The idea that these were two disparate entities, and that one somehow had command over the other. When she finally had this great big insight that this was actually a unified theory of everything, and actually you lived this perfectly embodied life. And the point wasn't to say, I shall now transcend my craving for chocolate cake, for my soul is purer than my appetite, but rather say, like, okay, no, I'm going to have a chocolate cake, but then I'm going to balance it with, some activities. I'm basically going to come up with the point system. Everything clicked and everything changed. Fast forward, or rather rewind, several thousands of years. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite Talmudic stories. And by the way, this comes with a disclaimer. It's about to get a little bit gross, but it's pure Talmud. This one is about Rabbi Hillel, the elder. You may recognize him from such maxims as that which is hateful unto you, don't do unto others.
Or recognize him as the man after whom the college Jewish organization Hillel is named.
Or that, which is a way of telling you he's the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time. He's, by the way, so great that he's one of the only rabbis in the Talmud who doesn't have the term rabbi. He's just Hillel.
Just
because,
Hillel.
Because if you're that guy, it's like Madonna, right? Like you're that person. You're so great, you don't even need the honor.
This is why I don't use my PhD. I don't say, don't
Correct.
call me doctor. I'm just Mark.
You're just Mark.
Just
You don't even need Oppenheimer.
I don't even.
You've ascended.
Transcended it all.
That's correct. And so Hillel, one day, he's sitting in the Bet Midrash in the house of study, and he tells his students, he gets up and he says, "Behold, for I shall now teach you a great mitzvah, a great kind of righteous deed." And the students are thrilled. My God, he's going to drop some knowledge. He's going to do some real great thing. And Hillel gets up, and they all follow him around. And he goes to the bathroom. And the students are standing there. They're a little bit shocked. And this is a good place to, again, insert a disclaimer. This is not me. This is the Talmud.
This is about to be what my children's nursery school calls potty talk.
Correct. The great rabbi goes number 2. And the students stand outside the door listening to this going on, and they're completely stunned. And the rabbi comes out, hopefully having washed his hands. And the students say respectfully, "Rabbi, but you promised you're going to teach us a great mitzvah. You just went number 2. And the rabbi looks at them and says, "Do you think that if I didn't do what I just did in there, I could continue to learn and teach you Torah? A body that cannot poop cannot pray." Basically instructing them in this great principle, which, by the way, Plato totally didn't get, but Aristotle did, that there is unity of mind and body, that if you want a system of life, a religion, or a diet plan, if you want to approach humanity and your life in this world, you have to think of yourself as an embodied entity. You cannot ignore that which is foul, that which is lowly, that which is niggling. You have to really embrace all aspects of your humanity. And once you do, and only once you do, transcendence can begin. Stunned silence.
Stunned silence. Is it
by,
really
by a poop joke?
It's really, that's the translation? If you can't poop, you can't pray?
More or less.
More or less.
I'm being very generous with the Aramaic here, but yes. Aramaic's a lovely language for it. A lot of curse words.
So the idea is actually that we're not so different from how we were a couple thousand years ago, that there was wisdom to be gleaned from these old guys walking around in togas and sandals.
They figured a lot of shall we say stuff? I don't know if you could curse on this show.
Yeah,
a lot of stuff out.
Yeah, and it was very tied up in other traditions of thought that were going on at the time. As you said, this was very Aristotelian, the idea that we have to embody our virtues, that you do stuff. If you want to know how to be, you practice it rather
than constant struggle.
It's a constant struggle. Like you're going through your day, you're learning, you're pooping,
Mm-hmm.
you're learning, you're being a parent, you're holding a job, that all of these are practices.
Right.
That ethics resides in practice.
And think of the traditions that these rabbis were going up against, which in a weird way are also ideas that a lot of us are going up against. They're there at the sort of like the budding dawn of Christianity. And a lot of these notions all of a sudden are contested by other faith traditions that say, no, actually, we need these like ascetic lives. We need these like moments of transcendence. Actually, we have a soul and it's pure, right? The Platonic model. There's the ideal, and we're going to aspire to it by denying ourselves marriage, or denying ourselves sex, or denying ourselves food, or denying ourselves whatever, so that we may rise above this mortal coil. That was a real competition right there, because those are very appealing, sexy ideas. And the rabbis were fighting for an embodied existence, which again is something that is much harder to come to terms with, because it's much less intoxicating.
Yeah.
Right? It's much easier to say, okay, I am now on the watermelon diet. I shall eat nothing but watermelons, and in 3 days I will lose 36 pounds. Great, that's really cool. Except for no one could live like that, as Gene Nidich, learned the hard way again and again and again. It's much harder to say, yes, I'm an embodied person, and the practice is what makes for a very slow and arduous, but ultimately true transcendence.
You talk also in your book about a story of a rabbi from the Talmud going to a prostitute. And this just occurred to me now, but of course, Augustine in his Confessions talks about his own sexual incontinence and prostitutes and mistresses and all this stuff, and says, my my pride-swollen eyes had blinded me, and he has to basically become someone much purer and better. Maybe tell us the story of how this is handled in the Talmud and how you resolve the encounter with the prostitute in the Jewish tradition.
I will tell you the story, but not before saying for the third time that everything I'm about to recount comes from Tractate Avodah Zarah in the Talmud. This is word for word. I'm not embellishing here at all.
Right. This is not the San Fernando Valley porn industry.
This is
sexing up.
No.
This is original second century, the real stuff.
These are the OG.
The real poop, as it were.
So once upon a time, there was a rabbi who really loved prostitutes. So much so that his name was Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, which means, loosely translated, Elazar, the man of the dregs of society. So one day, his friends come to him and
Johnny
say,
Red Light District.
Exactly so. His friends come and say, dude, there is a new girl in the game, and she is amazing. She's the best anyone has ever had. There are only two problems. Very expensive, and she lives very far away.
You have to cross 7 rivers.
7 rivers.
To get to her.
And you have to deliver a purse full of silver coins. Rabbi Elazar says, not a problem. Works hard, saves his pennies, travels through the 7 rivers.
Puts it into his Christmas account.
He gets to her house. They undress, money on the dresser. They start doing what he'd come so far to do. And mid-coitus, again, this is the Talmud, not me. Mid-coitus, the prostitute lets out a mighty fart. And Elazar is stunned by this sudden flatulence. He looks at her, and she says to him, know that just as this fart of mine can never return to its source, meaning my butt, so too can you never cleanse yourself of your sins. And Elazar is struck by the harshness and suddenness of this judgment. And he runs outside naked. And he goes to the river. And he says, River, please talk to God. Tell him that I am a pure person. And the river says, I'm sorry. I'm a river. I have river business. I can't help you there. So he looks at the rocks and the trees. And he says, rocks and trees, you have got to help me. Tell the Almighty that I'm a good person. And the rocks and the trees say, sorry, dude, we're rocks and trees. We have no business, advocating in your behalf. So finally, he appeals to the one force that he thinks is probably closest to the source. He looks up to the heavens and he says, heavens, please, you're God's home. Talk to him. Tell him I'm a good person. And the heavens say, we're sorry. We have our own stuff. And so Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya sits naked on the ground and puts his head between his knees and weeps bitterly and says, God, I want you to know that I am so sorry, and I just want you to take me now. And at that moment, he dies. And a voice comes from heaven and informs his friends that Rabbi Elazar went straight to heaven, to Olam Haba, to the world to come. And the friends are standing here on earth, and they're stunned.
Rabbi Elazar?
They're saying, Rabbi Elazar, the worst dude we know, this whoring hound who spent every day and every shekel on prostitutes, this guy gets to go to heaven? Why? And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the man who codified the Mishnah, the greatest rabbi of his time, says, there are those among us who buy their place in the world to come in just one moment. Basically teaching us, guys, yes, some of us are very pious their entire lives, and that's great, and that certainly gets you a reward. But even one moment of clarity, even one moment of purity, one moment of true kavana, intentionality, could get you a place in the world to come, which I think is such an amazing guiding principle of Judaism and of life today.
And that we're all on different journeys.
Yes.
That Rabbi Elazar, he was going to get there at his own good time.
That's right.
And
in his own good way.
And in his own good way. You begin one of the last chapters in the book with the story of 2 authors who I have to say are not my favorite, but are the favorites of children of mine and good friends of mine. You know that I'm not a fantasy fiction bro. So
you're way too Jewish to engage for these, in the high Catholicism of Tolkien and Lewis.
Yeah. And well, what's so great about them as a pair is one was a high Catholic, one was a high Anglican. They had all the Goyish, all the Gentile bases
A smorgasbord of
covered.
Goyishness, if you will. Yeah.
So I'm not a Narnia dude, and I'm not a Middle Earth Lord of the Rings dude, but I'm aware of their cultural importance, and I was really intrigued that you started a chapter with these two super Christians and then segued from there into Talmud. Tell us the story of that friendship and what it has to do with Talmud.
I was indulging my my well observed Catholic fetish.
It was your Catholic fetish and your fantasy fiction inner
It's
geekdom fetish.
They're all intertwined.
It's all
beautiful, intricate way. The reason I'm so attracted to this story isn't just because I'm a super fan of these two wonderful writers, but also because it struck me that there was something very instructive about their friendship, a virtue that I think is deeply misunderstood in our own time. In our own time, friendship reads and comes across as some kind of demand for constant, unmitigated support. It's a hallmark sentiment. It says, be here for me, stand by me, have my back. Lewis and Tolkien understood it very differently, and as I'll try to convince you in a moment, they had a very Talmudic understanding of what it meant to be a friend. They famously devoted much time to each other, famously helped each other with their works. Lewis read Tolkien's work and arguably shaped it from a madman's sprawling universe with 17 languages and 17 races and their intricate histories into a story that compelled millions of readers.
He said, Tolkien, not every elf can have his own language.
That's right.
Chill out, man.
Surely some elves speak the same dialect.
Right.
And Tolkien helped Lewis become not only a Christian, importantly and famously, but also really become a writer, at which point they had a major falling out because their styles were very disparate and because they started to look at each other's work very critically. Tolkien looked at Lewis and said, this is a parable for children. It is ridiculous and simplistic and doesn't serve any real intellectual moral purpose. What is this garbage? And increasingly, Lewis said, "Okay, well, I understand you're very enamored with your races and your languages and your tongues and your everything, but this is becoming too much." They had a famous falling out to the point that Lewis dies, and Tolkien famously does not attend his funeral and becomes very hurt and reticent about this. Rewind again. Back to the Talmud. I'll tell you one quick story, and then I'll expound a little bit on the principle here. So one day in Talmudic times, a macho, muscular, masculine gladiator, brigand, robber, some say even a cannibal, is walking down the street, and he sees what he believes is a beautiful naked woman bathing in the Sea of Galilee. To which his first thought, being an all-out, rough guy, is I am going to jump into this lake and I'm going to have my way with this fair maiden. And so he jumps into the lake, and to his great surprise, the maiden is none other but Rabbi Yochanan, the very handsome, we're told, greatest rabbi of his day. And so the brigand, whose name is Reish Lakish, looks at Rabbi Yochanan and says, "You are so beautiful. You should have been a woman." And Rabbi Yochanan looks at Reish Lakish and says, "You are so strong. You should have been a Torah scholar. You should use the strength to study Torah." And they get talking. And Rabbi Yochanan says, "Look, here's the deal. If you promise me to abandon your life of your rough and rowdy ways, as Bob Dylan would put it, and become a Torah scholar, I will teach you everything I know, and I will introduce you to my sister who could be your wife." And so the story goes that when Reish Lakish exited the Sea of Galilee, he had lost all of his earthly strength. He couldn't even pick up his shield and his sword because he had transformed. He literally had a baptism, right? And became a Torah scholar. And indeed, he became the second greatest scholar of his day, second only to his new brother-in-law, Rabbi Yochanan. Soon enough, however, friction starts because Reish Lakish is now very, very smart and learned, and he starts questioning things that Rabbi Yochanan says. So one day they're having this discussion, and it involves swords. At what point they want to know, does a sword truly become its most swordy? Is it at the point of its melting? Is it at the point of its creation? What is it? And so Rabbi Yochanan says it's the most sword-like when it's in the kiln, when it's in the oven, when it's warm and red hot. That's when it's echt swordy. And Reish Lakish, who's had some experience with swords, said no, because actually that's when the metal is softest. It becomes its most sword-like essence. When you take it out of the kiln and you put it in water and then it hardens into the real metal, that's when it becomes a sword. And Yochanan is so miffed that Reish Lakish again kind of, contradicted him. He said, oh yeah, you should know about swords, dude. Basically transgressing against a very important principle of Torah that you never remind a convert, a repentant person, of his past sins. And so Reish Lakish says, why are you insulting me? Why did you take me out of my life as a gladiator just to mock me? Forget it. I'm going home. And he goes home and becomes very sick. And Yochanan is very proud. He says, oh, good. He had what was coming to him. He, contradicted me. And Yochanan's sister, Reish Lakish's wife, says, man, he's really not doing well. You should go see him. Apologize, whatever. Just talk to him. And Yochanan is proud. He says, no. And Reish Lakish dies. And Yochanan loses his mind with grief. So much so that eventually the rabbis have to pray that he too dies so that his grief doesn't last long. And that indeed happens. And it's a very tragic ending to a story that teaches us a very important principle of what friendship is like. Because in Talmudic parlance, and as a sort of kind of indicative in this story of Yochanan and Reish Lakish, as in the story of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis.
And Tolkien, he didn't even attend C.S. Lewis's
He
funeral.
did not, no. They had a very bad falling out. But the point of friendship, according to the Talmud, is basically to serve, there's a really beautiful piece of metaphor, like two pieces of metal sharpening each other. It says a friend is someone with who you could spar in a way that sharpens you and sharpens your friend. It's someone who would call you out on your nonsense. It's someone who would challenge you to be better. It's someone who would take everything that you say and question it and force you to this point of self-reflection, introspection, growth, sometimes out of a sense of a little bit of spite. There's a tradition in which we only study Talmud in something called a chevruta, which is a pair of two people. If you ever walk into a bet midrash, into a house of study, you see pairs of students and they're shouting at each other because your chevruta is never your bro that you hang out with, because what would happen if it's your bro? You would sit there and be like, yeah, I know we have to study. So later we're going to go to, Billy's pub and
watch the game,
get it. You'll just get into this chummy mode. But when you're studying with someone who's kind of your frenemy, you'll be like, oh, I prepared for this, dude. I'm going to one-out you. It's like, are you going to one-up me? I'm going to one-up you. I'm going to two-up you. I'm going to three-up you. And you do this thing, and as you do this thing, you truly learn, and you truly challenge yourself, and you truly challenge other people. That is a Talmudic notion of friendship. It's one that I think we desperately need today because it makes for sharper, stronger people.
And probably as our country and our world has become more polarized, we have fewer friends like that.
That's right.
Right. There are fewer
almost none.
There are fewer Democrats who, hey, that's my Republican buddy. Fewer libertarians. That's my socialist buddy. That's, we're in our little world.
How dare you not conform to all my, pre-approved notions and ideas?
How dare you not agree with me all the time? Right. Interesting. You mentioned Reish Lakish. I want to pivot from that story.
By the way, what a name!
Right. Well,
you wish your name was Reish Lakish?
That's what I want to pivot to. One of the pleasures of the Talmud, in addition to the fact that there are talking rivers and talking trees and talking animals, that basically it's Pee-wee's Playhouse meets Sesame Street meets,
I believe Mekaleka High is Aramaic for.
Who's the guy who just died who made the puppets, the children's theater? Charlie Kraft?
Right, yeah.
What did he make? He made
He made HR Puffin stuff.
Puffin stuff, right. Which was never my jam, but I know, speaking of talking animals and whatnot. So aside from the fact that the Talmud is, among other things, a totally weird, psychic, LSD-infused, playscape of talking trees, it also has some of the best names there are. Could you give me your top 5 Talmudic rabbis' names?
Well, the names are actually very confusing because a lot of them are repetitive. I don't think that their names are necessarily sometimes the greatest things. I don't think you could top Reish Lakish.
Well, there's a Rabbi Bagbag, right?
There's a Ben Bagbag.
Ben Bagbag.
Ben Bagbag is like straight out of Star Wars.
Right, that's pretty good.
Misa Ben Bagbag. That's pretty great. But the thing that I truly enjoy are the sort of I don't want to say curses, but the jabs. Because here's the thing. So you mentioned the psychedelic stuff. There's a lot of agada, or legend storytelling in the Talmud, and the stories are fantastic, figuratively and literally fantastic. There's also a lot of legalese, right? A lot of argumentation. These people are looking very seriously at intricate questions of all walks of life. But the thing to remember is this is a record of arguments. And in arguments between mostly men and mostly young men, mostly temperamental young men, there are going to be some sharp words. And all of a sudden you would see some word. It'd be like, what does shinana mean? It's long-toothed one, which is the kind of greatest insult in Talmudic times. Like, you and your long teeth, you big-toothed jackass.
Yeah.
It's just a very beautiful thing to behold.
Give me another favorite.
Well, just a the kind of the music of Aramaic, the hipcha mistabra, the sayings and the things that just come out of it. One word that I love dearly. In fact, I wanted this to be the title of this book is this word teko, which, by the way, in contemporary Hebrew, if two teams play soccer can end in a tie, and it ends in a tie, we say teko. Say teko 1-1, teko 1-1, teko 0-0, 0-0. Teko in Aramaic means let it stand. Sometimes you have discussions that are so incredibly heated. There's just no way of coming to any answer, and so they say, okay, let it stand. Teko. The argument is unresolved. And it found its way into modern Hebrew, and it's this beautiful word because it connotes this principle of I can't argue this anymore.
I want to ask a few
This
questions.
will not be resolved.
I want to ask a few big picture questions about how Talmud infuses Judaism and your Judaism. One of the things you'll hear a lot of Jews say who take very, very heretical views, either religiously heretical views or politically heterodox views, either far to the left or far to the right of what you might call mainstream Jewish life, is they'll say, well, Judaism is, since Talmudic times, just argument. It's not about finding the right answers. It's just about the fight. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, any fight I pick with you just makes me more Jewish, right? When I take my extremely anti-Zionist stance, or when I take my extremely, maximalist stance, when I take my stance that's totally socialistic, or my stance that's totally libertarian, right? It's just as Jewish as you because it's all about the argument. We know that from Talmud. How do you feel about that usage of Talmud to kind of justify any position as highly Jewish?
In true Talmudic fashion, I both hate it and love it very much. I hate it because I think it oftentimes provides a talus for the wicked, a kind of canopy for people who clearly have no real interest in Judaism to basically wrap themselves up and present their heresies as, this is, Judaism says that we ought to do this thing that clearly a little bit of study would reveal from the left and from the right is very, kind of completely antithetical to all of our tradition. But I also I have to be honest, I really love it. I think that the greatest plague of our day, if I may stroke my, graying beard and be Talmudic for a moment, is the fact that life is becoming for us very flat, facile, fast, and frictionless. I'm old enough to remember that when you ordered stuff on the internet, it came within a week. That was fast. Then it was 2-day shipping. Then overnight. Then same day. There are places in New York right now when it's 15 minutes. Amazon at some point probably is going to start sending you stuff before you even buy it because they know what you want.
The chip implanted in your brain will tell them what you want.
Right, and there's a point to that which is so lovely, right? Because it's so convenient and, again, fast and frictionless and flat. But at some point, it really actually robs life of all of its complexities. It trains you to just get to your solution very quickly, to surround yourself with people who are agreeable to you, to surround yourself with services that are convenient to you, to really kind of let go of anything that's a little bit difficult or a lot difficult, but actually profoundly challenging and deeply beautiful. And there's something to this notion of saying, I am here to argue with you, and the argument is sacred. Machloket l'shem shamayim, as we're told in the Talmud, an argument for the sake of heaven. It's so beautiful. Are there villains who abuse this principle time and again? Do we see them every day? Yes, we do. Are there also many people in this tradition who truly do see their Jewish life seriously and take their energy and their life force from this principle? Sure. I was giving a talk yesterday, and this gentleman at a high reform temple, shall we say, and this gentleman who is not a Talmudic scholar, having listened to this presentation of mine, comes and says, it seems to me that the Talmud is in a really in a reform tradition. It's an attempt to constantly argue about things. I was like, you know what? I love that. Go with that, because there is something about that that's profoundly true. It's an invitation to enter it not in the spirit of blind obedience, but in the spirit of almost revelry in the dissent and the argument, and that is always a better spirit, always the correct way to approach any set of principles and ideas worth withholding. Because here's the thing, when you do it, you find out very quickly, if your mind and your heart are open, you find out very quickly what is true. The great thing about the Talmud, and the frustrating thing about the Talmud, obviously the same thing, is that the way that the rabbis would approach things, they would set a principle, and say, well, the Torah teaches X. Let's understand what X is. And then they would start coming up with absolutely ridiculous examples. Oh, so you say that a sukkah on the holiday of Sukkot, the sukkah, the hut that we need to stay in, has to have this many walls? Okay, well, can an elephant be a wall? Because it's a big thing, and you read it, be like, guys, what are you kidding? Like, what are these dumb questions? But then you realize what they're doing. They're actually trying to project into real life, to project these principles into real life so that they could argue ad nauseum about all these tiny little intricacies and really distill the idea and the thought to its purest essence, so that they say, okay, well, we understand what we say when we say we believe X. These are not abstractions. These are not, we believe tikkun olam, everyone should repair the world. Great. Now, what does that mean? These constant arguments are how we sharpen each other, how we get to the point of what these things actually mean. So let there be more argument.
Can we make the claim that it's therefore very un-Talmudic to be highly convicted or convinced of certain political positions, whatever they might be, that to be stuck as, in an ideology is un-Talmudic?
No.
No.
Because, again, the Talmud should not be taken as an invitation for constant wavering. The Talmud has an end and a goal to it. The goal is a better, clearer, pure understanding of the one big truth, right, of God's words. The Talmud isn't there, if I may speak so boldly and so, kind of abstractly, to convince you that you ought to go through life constantly sort of doubting these principles. Rather, the journey is to get closer to some kind of clarity and mastery of what we believe are the words of God from heaven. By way of metaphor, I think it is an invitation to very, very, very seriously, constantly question your political beliefs, but also a reminder that this process needn't be unending, and that you needn't be sort of undulating. Oh, this idea is good, but this idea is also good. I could see all ways and all arguments, but rather to say, like, yes, I have very seriously given thought to the 3 or 4 or 6 precepts that always bothered me about my way of life, or my convictions or my political persuasions. I have grappled with them seriously. I have considered them. I could say right now why I don't think that merits any real, change of behavior or change of attitude. That to me is also a very Talmudic principle. These are not waverers and ditherers. These are men of very, very strong convictions that sometimes change, but often grow deeper and grow more fiery.
So your argument here is that the Talmud can change your life. How has it changed yours?
It has slowed me down in the most beautiful and absolutely necessary way. I was addicted to answers. In some ways I still am. In some ways we all are. You love to gently mock me for my obsession with a website or application called TaskRabbit, which allows you to press a button and receive a human on your doorstep who would run whatever errand you don't want to run, like taking bags to Goodwill or whatever. And that was a giddy part of my life, right? I said, like, oh, I have 3 bags here. I don't have the time. Here, I'll get this guy to do this. I'll get this guy to do that. And there's something intoxicating and exhilarating about it.
Life hacking.
Life hacking, right? Oh my God, I saved 7 hours today by getting 3 random people to run all over Manhattan.
Do the work of my life.
Exactly. Raise my children and, make love to my wife. No. But there is something that you get when you live the Talmudic life, when you slow down, when you start asking yourself these questions that makes you much more deliberate, much more introspective, much more inclined to stop and look at things from all angles. I'll give you one example, and it's kind of a weird one, but I think it's a really, really beautiful one because, again, everything in the Talmud is a question. Here's one of the biggest questions. Why are the books arranged in the order in which they are arranged? Because you're reading things as a reader. The first instinct is, I want to make sense of it. So I mentioned earlier in our conversation that the Talmud is divided into these 6 orders, these 6 big parts, each pertaining to a field in human life. The order of Nashim, which deals with the family, is one of the main most prominent ones. Now, you would think that if I tasked you to edit, you're a writer and an editor, if I said to you, Mark, please edit a compendium of rabbinic wisdom about the family, I think it's reasonable to say, you would say, okay, well, the family, where does the family start? Okay, maybe I'll start with, the rules of dating. Maybe I'll start with the rules of marriage because that's the ceremony that connotes family. Maybe it's childbirth because that's when, 2 people really start their family cell. The rabbis of the Talmud start with a tractate called Yevamos, which conveys the laws of levirate marriage. This is a principle, as archaic as it gets, that states that if a woman loses her husband, and the husband has, which was sadly a common occurrence back then, and the husband has brothers who are single of marrying age, they have an obligation to come to the woman and say, I will marry you unless you wish to go marry someone else, in which case I will release you, which was a very kind of humane and just thing to do in order to make sure that this young poor widow isn't stranded and loses in a patriarchal society all of her source of support and income. A, it's archaic. B, it's hella depressing. Why on earth would you start the discussion of family law with this? And you ponder it and you ponder it, and my friend and co-conspirator on our podcast, Rabbi David Bashevkin, has this great insight into this. So rabbis didn't just want to write down, oh, family, let's get moving, let's get cracking, let's get more stuff done. They asked themselves the fundamental questions of life. What is a family? And the answer that they gave a family isn't what happens when, it's the bachelor party or, the rehearsal dinner and we're all dressed nicely and we're in some resort and it's great and there are tequila shots. A family is what coheres around you in your darkest time of need. When there's, God forbid, a tragedy, God forbid, a death, your family are the people who come and say, we're here for you. We are going to do very hard things for you in your very hard time right now. As in, God forbid, when you lose someone, family steps up and says, we're here. That's what a family is. The Talmud forces you to ask these questions and come to these realizations again and again and again. And once you do, you grow calmer. You grow, I think, more insightful, or at least more tolerant of insight. And you grow more concerned with listening to quote another great Torah phrase, that's still small voice, that kind of very tender divine whisper that teaches us the most profound of teachings.
And I guess the fact that you have committed to reading something every day for 7.5 years.
Then there's that. For like 3 hours a day, because this takes time.
Have you been doing 3 hours a day?
here's the thing. I'm a maniac, and so I started doing it, and I'm reading in English because I don't speak any Aramaic. And at some point, like a year and a half into it, like, you can't be serious. Like, you can't do it in English. Like, you're not tourists here. Come on, man, shape up. And so I took a coach, a personal gym teacher, a lovely rabbi from Yeshiva University who really cracked the whip. Got my Aramaic to where it needs to be. Also got me reading the page right behind us right now. It's called Surat Hadaf, the shape of the page, to read from the actual page rather from any one of great websites and or books. Like Sefaria.org is one I highly recommend, in which you see it in English in a way that kind of makes sense as a text. Reading the actual page, getting getting into the habit of looking at a word and then jumping to the Rashi, to the commentary, like your eyes are all over the page, doing this kind of work. That takes a lot of time, and it takes even more time to do the work that we do on the Take One podcast, which is trying to find really intricate Talmudic disputations and trying to find in them this one or two or three little nuggets that you could make relevant, that you could make accessible, that you can make approachable to audiences today. That, my friend, takes time, and it is the greatest privilege and pleasure of my life.
So 2 final questions. One, and you can take these in whatever order you want. One, I kind of hate the self-help genre, and I feel I know you well enough to know that you probably hate it too.
Oh, I love it with a passion. Are
Do you?
Kidding me?
I
Yes.
always forget there are certain
Yes.
ways in which you're basically.
I'm a self-described basic bitch.
Yeah,
I think I can say this on this podcast.
Yeah.
I love anything that reeks of self-improvement, because I think it's
mass market consumerism.
profoundly true. Again, think back of the body that doesn't poop.
Right.
Can't pray. It's the person who doesn't shop can't evolve.
Right.
I really believe in this. There's something so wonderful.
The guy who's not in Steve Madden shoes or Uggs cannot learn Talmud.
Just for one second.
Yeah.
Because we're reading this and we're having this discussion on the eve of reading Parshat Vayishlach, and there's a beautiful point. Jacob just struggled with Esau, and he comes back to the land of Canaan after a 21-year absence, and the Torah tells us that he came back shalem, whole. And the rabbis, for centuries, obviously, said, well, what does it mean to be shalem, to be whole? And Rashi, and following him, the famous Rav Kook, who I love dearly, the 20th century great, land of Israel rabbinic authority, said that it meant he was whole in body. He was no longer afflicted by all the wounds that he received during this arduous journey after struggling with the angel, etc. In soul, because he'd made peace with his brother. And interestingly enough, in pocket. He had money. He left a young poor man with nothing but his staff. He came back, he was rich. Why would that be important? Why would that be a part of the story? Because that is how life happens, because the very next verse tells us, or the interpreters tell us that the verse tells us, because the verse is a little bit weirdly constructed, that Jacob then made sure that the city where he lived was flourishing. He built bathhouses and marketplaces. He built nice things. He built malls and theaters, basically, because that's how humans live. Humans don't live in, pure aesthetic, learn of Torah and study of Torah and learning, high wisdom. We shop for stuff. We like our Uggs. We enjoy our Starbucks coffee. We like these small pleasures because these small pleasures unlock in us the potential to ascend and elevate. That's what's so appealing and intoxicating about capitalism. And I freaking love it.
So final question then, where should someone dive in? To buy the Talmud, it's how many volumes?
It is 63 volumes.
63 volumes, 2,711 pages.
Correct.
It's to get a good
the
original
beach read.
Or translation is thousands of dollars,
yes.
Right? Fortunately, we have the internet.
Sefaria.org.
You would send people to Sefaria.org?
Absolutely.
Where they
Terrific.
get the Davidson translation, right?
They get the Steinsaltz translation, which is wonderful.
Is it now the Steinsaltz? Because they had started, I thought, with the Davidson. Did they got rights to the Steinsaltz?
I believe it is.
Regardless.
I'm not 100% sure, but there's a very good translation.
It's a good translation.
With elucidation, with all the commentary you could want. Very accessible in Hebrew and in English. There for your perusal. It's fantastic. And here's the other thing that I'm going to give two other or 3 other hacks.
Right.
One, obviously, buy my book.
Right. Obviously,
Available wherever fine books are sold.
Right.
Second, listen to our podcast, which is great, or any other Daf Yomi podcast.
Right.
Take One podcast, or any other Daf Yomi podcast, because it really would kind of help you pick up that steam. Don't worry, by the way, like, oh, I'll have to start from the beginning, or I have to wait. It doesn't matter. It's like jumping into a river. The river will never stop for you, nor will it make sense if it did. Just jump in and start doing it. Then the third piece of advice, which I think is really, 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 really important, most important piece of advice I can give: find yourself a chavruta, find yourself a partner. Say, okay, I'm going to do it with my friend who's just as clueless and ignorant as I am, but really likes that stuff, and I think we'll have a good time just arguing about things. We're going to do it together. Do it with someone, not only because it will kind of commit you to the practice, but that's also how it was meant to be learned.
Are you doing it with someone?
I'm doing it with so many someones. It's great.
But is that the same thing?
Yes, because every one of these relationships is very different. I'll study a piece with, or a page with, someone like Rabbi Bashevkin, and we would be in a very different conversation than I would get from when I study it with, some of my friends who say are lawyers and have very different ways of looking at the world, and very different ways of looking at the world than my, very, very kind of like militant atheist friends who are doing this because they understand the beauty and the magic of their own tradition, though they don't believe in, the creator that's the source of all this, but want to kind of argue their way into it. It's actually, I think, a great way to go through it, because it just shows you how intricate and beautiful this work that contains multitudes truly is.
Liel, thank you.
What a pleasure.
I've been talking with Liel Leibovitz, the author of How the Talmud Can Change Your Life, surprisingly modern advice from a very old book, in bookstores near you. And I want to thank America Magazine, the Roman Catholic magazine, in whose studios we're bringing our very Jewish conversation. We didn't get a chance to access their bar cart, which is stage right off to my side, but it is well stocked, and we'll check it out next time we're here. So thanks to America Magazine.